The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and does not represent legal or accounting advice or counsel and should not be seen as such. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only, a conversation. We make no promises or assertions on how this information will impact your business, your personal life, or financial well-being. The information relayed does not imply endorsement or offer opposition to any specific organization, product, or services. The latest data shows that 76% of Canadian businesses expect to exit their business within the next 10 years, yet they have made no move to prepare. This can cost companies multiples of their value left on the table unrealized and impact not just the retirement plan in the form of financial security and family well-being, but that which is attached to the legacy of spending a lifetime building a business from scratch and then living to regret the deal made. Let's have a conversation. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to Jason Vance, owner, founder of BubbleUp Marketing, and we're going to talk about succession and transition shift. But I want to start, Jason, tell me a little bit about your history, not necessarily the history of BubbleUp, but I really want to know, were you an intentional entrepreneur? Did you always know you were going to own businesses, or did you kind of move into it to say, okay, well, here's an opportunity. This aligns with my value set and where I want to see myself going. Tell me about the evolution of Jason Vance as a business owner.
Right. I was thinking about this a little bit. I mean, I had probably some side hustles, like as a young adult, that where I subcontracted or did things here and there. I think that the big shift for me, if I want to use that term, the biggest shift was when I was in college and I ran a painting franchise. And so it was just a 1 year thing. And I signed up for this and I learned like operations, I learned business processes, some finance that I wasn't really that great at, sales flow, like got some sales training and how to run team and culture. And it was like a baptism by fire year, right? Like there was so much going on and I absolutely loved it. I don't know, it fed something in me that I was like, oh, this is what I want to do, right? This kind of thing, maybe not painting, but this is what I want to do. So then from there, I stumbled into an IT company and I had an interest in that for maybe 15 years. And then along the way, I built marketing agencies. And I think then probably since, let's say the last 13 years, I think I've bought 8 companies. So the acquisitions, and a lot of them are just smaller, but smaller, larger, it really kind of dovetails down to some core elements that I look for. Yeah.
That is a wonderful aspect of what we want to talk about today. So 8 companies, would you say that BubbleUp is the head, is the flagship, and the other companies fall under it? Do they tickle a fancy in some regard, or are they aligned with BubbleUp?
It started where everything was coming under BubbleUp, and then over the last 5 years, it's been morphing into different brands, different companies. So now we have a different problem where we've got these group of companies, what do we call ourselves in the office? And so now we've come up with the term brand collab, and that is like the brand collab group of companies, of which BubbleUp is one part of that. And there's about 5 different entities underneath brand collab. And so they're not all marketing. I'm in the automotive sector a little bit. And I bought a software product out of Australia about a year ago now. And so just expanding a little bit more into different industries that we've been wanting to get involved in.
So as a benefit specialist, now having a SEPA, I'm looking at that transition of not just the business, but the employees under that business. So some of my questions are going to be cued toward that human capital and so delving deeper into that. But what we know is that exit planning should be good strategic business planning. Like we all know that. And it's staggering to me that you've bought 8 businesses over the course of time and sold others. And I'm really curious because so many businesses go on the market with the intention to sell and they don't sell.
Mm,
Right? The founder basically goes with the business and you wind it up for whatever you can get.
yeah.
So take me through the opportunities that present themselves. Like, do you see a business and say, hey, I want to buy that business, and you approach the business owner and say, listen, I'm going to make you a deal? Or have you had opportunities come to you, and or perhaps it's both, being that we're talking about several different lines?
On the acquisition side, yeah, a lot of them have just come to me, right? So I haven't gone out. I don't know if I've ever really gone out and looked for, I want to buy this company, right? They've always come to me through one form of fashion. Like it could be, I'm on a board and one of the board members introduces me to somebody who's moving and has a small company that they want to get rid of, and they might use a magic word like fire sale, and then I was like, oh, okay, well, I wasn't really in the market, but let's talk. So there's some different parts, but usually they come to me through referral for sure.
And I like your note on the fire sale because, so many times people don't plan to exit. The
Yeah.
exit comes upon them, right? And
Yes.
there's always going to be somebody to buy to take advantage of that deal, because who doesn't like a good sale,
Mhm.
right? So whether it's death, disability, disillusionment, divorce sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, how has buying businesses influenced the way that you look at the empire, right? The
Mm.
the empire that has been built by Jason, and does it form part of your strategic planning, knowing how to get out, having so much experience in buying business?
I would say, yeah, I think about it a lot. And it's interesting that you have this exit planner designation, because it's one of the things anybody I talk to in the industry that deals with either brokering business deals or with transition planning, the number one thing I hear is that most businesses don't think about it far enough in advance. So, I have a little bit of runway left. I'm still in the middle of my career basically, but I'm looking at, okay, what happens 10 years from now? What happens 15 years from now? When is there a Jason Vance denouement? When do I need to start pulling back and ensuring that I've got this runway of, to the best of my ability, let's say 3 to 5 years of really focused. I'm running operational lean. I am maximizing my profit. I've got my culture dialed in the way that I wanted to. I've got a good management team in place. And I myself, as the owner, am not required for extended periods in the business, right? Those are the key elements that I think I look for and that I want to set up so that actually way back like 20 years ago, one of my first accountants said to me, an investor doesn't really look at the business until it's like, can it run without the owner?
Yes.
And I'm like, huh. And that's always stuck with me because I thought, well, what does that look like? And so as a leader and as a business owner, you need to continually look at, how do I replace myself in these roles as I grow so that I am not required? Because then those other components that I mentioned, they all fall into place, and it makes it much more attractive to the market when they realize that they can come in and buy the company and they don't require, full participation from the current owner, like for an extended
Absolutely.
period of time. There's usually a transition period there, and some of the acquisitions have gone better than others, right? And that's a key point of buying businesses as well. And I think exiting is that, what are you getting into from that business owner? What's their makeup, their personality? How do they run their company? Because if they are controlling the ins and outs of every decision that happens, and you don't know that, which I've experienced, that can be a very difficult purchase or sale. Like it, on both sides, that is a really different, and it's not good for the business. It's not good for staff. It's not good for the business continuation. It's a whole bunch of pain, right? And then you'll have another acquisition or sale that is the business owner is holding things with loose hands. They're operating at a certain level. They're in for the transition. They work themselves out of a job essentially, and they ride off into the sunset. And it's like, perfect. That's great. Everything continues. Staff are fine. Culture's good. Everything's intact. And that's a much smoother transition for sure.
You know what, in your just like you read out of the book, that's for sure, that is the ideal. And it's, we always end up somewhere in the middle. And I think what you're, to paraphrase, we're talking about systems, processes, automate what can be automated, and make sure you have a good human capital, human talent that can see through that transition. But whatever happens to when we first start in business, and I know when I first started in business, and I consider myself an accidental entrepreneur, seen an opportunity, you see a need, you fill a need, and oopsie daisies, now I own it. But I knew going in, the methodology is don't get in unless you know how to get out.
Mm,
And
yeah.
then somewhere in the middle, when our identity gets intertwined with our business, and even though we know our business can run without us, but we are still that identity, what do you think happens in that middle part, that we stop thinking about what got us into the business and knowing how to get out, that now we're almost wearing the cement shoes to holding us to the business?
That's a really good question. Like, I think it's hard. There's probably a couple lenses that I would take on this. One, I feel like, if you grow something from essentially nothing, right? So you start from the ground. You are the solopreneur. You're the first person that gets employed by the business, let's just say, right? And so you're growing this thing. What I have found is that at different junction points, and they're, or growth points, if you want to call them, you almost have to reinvent yourself. So it's hard to explain. It's probably different for everyone, but there will be a certain limitation in my skill set that I recognize I no longer do this well, and I need to bring in people that can do this better, right? And the faster I can move through that ladder and have the cash flow and everything, of course, to take care of that, but to get these things off my plate so that I am solely working in the area that I'm best at as an entrepreneur. That's where I have good value, right? And so I call them glass ceilings sometimes, where you hit this glass ceiling, but it's really a mental ceiling. It's a mental ceiling in your own head that it's like, I can't give up this control. I can't give up finance. I can't give up sales. That's what it is for me right now. I can't give up sales, right? And I have to force myself, I have to give that up, right? If I want to move to the next level, if I want to get a little bit bigger, I need to build these things underneath me and let it go. And of course, I'm going to be aware of it, but what reporting mechanisms are going to make me feel comfortable as the business owner that I can get proactively sent to me versus trying to babysit tons of different things in the business? That doesn't work, right? I'm spread too thin. So I think, reinventing yourself as a leader is really, really important, and having that, almost holding it with loose hands. And most of us sometimes struggle with that. Like, we want to control the controllables. So I think that's probably the biggest piece. And then I would say something that I still struggle with is, you alluded to kind of being the face of the company, right? Like, it's centered around, especially at the small level, you as the person, right? Like, you're the one who's networked. You're the one who understands the market. You've met most of the customers. I think there was probably a shift in my business at one point where I actually didn't meet a lot of the clients. I don't right now. I don't know who they are. I see brands sometimes on trucks that drive by, or signs on buildings, and I'm like, I think they're a client, right? And because I've never met them. And that shows me, like, okay, this is operating without me fully in every meeting, right? Where I have to be the front and center of everything. Now, I might be on the marketing side of things, or maybe the larger networking opportunities, or perhaps on social media I'm pushing out there. But I think what I've started to do is work on my personal brand more than, and leave the corporate brand. So the corporate brand is a bit more corporate-y, if you will, right? It's got the logo and and there could be multiple people that fall into that. but Jason Vance brand, whatever comes through that door can get funneled to any of the companies that he's involved in.
Right.
That makes sense. So if I can pull myself out a little bit and be more of my own brand, then I don't have to be like, well, Jason's the face of BubbleUp, or Jason's the face of CI, or Jason's the face of whatever it is. I don't want to be, how am I supposed to be the face of like 6 companies? I can't, right? But if I can pull the personal brand out, I feel like that's a better way to separate the owner from the brand itself.
I can relate to that, Jason, because that's exactly what we're doing. I think sometimes in our history, and we have a long history of being in business. I think sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a bit of a J curve, isn't there? Like when you decide to make these changes, it first plummets downward. Like you're spending more money, you're spending more time. It looks like it's going nowhere because you're going downhill before you get, because it's not all a hockey stick, right? It doesn't go like this and
Right.
clip off the bottom. If you touch below the surface and then you start to go up, what keeps you motivated to constantly go into that J curve? Because if you've done this over and over again, you know you're hitting into that J curve before you're going up. How do you keep yourself motivated to say, okay, I'm going down right now, but I know I'm going to go back up?
Part of it, I think, is sheer will and determination to fight through. And I don't know if I've ever recognized it as a pattern, but I think I've always had this optimism, like I can I can push through this. I can it's going to be okay, right? Like there's certain markers that I watch. And not everything has worked out perfectly, for sure. Like there's some J curves that don't come turn into a J. They just go down.
I know, I know that, but we got to keep the tenacity going, right? We can say, well, we've done it before, and I guess that is where the decision comes in. I've just acquired this, but at what point do you see it not going up, right?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, we've had a few of those situations where I've got one that's, I'll call it, that company has to reinvent itself because it was purchased just before COVID. It was very reliant on the physical marketing trade show type business. And, really, as soon as COVID hit, it just didn't really have enough momentum and to change and morph into something else. So it's been pretty much dormant for a few years. Then now, we're reinventing it and starting to do other things with that particular business. And we've had a trickle of business come through, but it really wasn't much. And then I remember another one where I flogged it for a while. So like that dead horse kind of thing, like, let's go, we could do it. And I kept thinking it was okay. And I remember I had a business consultant or an advisor come in at one point, and they were doing some work with us. And he looked at me and said, Jason, like, you could triple your revenue in this and you'd still lose money. And I was like, what?
That's not an easy
So,
conversation.
right? And I got up from that meeting, walked across the hall to where that company was operating. I said, okay, we're going to close this down and repurpose what we're doing here. So, I mean, nobody lost their jobs, but at the same time, it was, as soon as the numbers were given to me, I'm like, shoot, I'm not going to win this one. So let's call it a day and move on.
Can relate to that too. We just sometimes think as entrepreneurs, if we just work harder, we just keep working it, and then sometimes, like, the market will decide. The market decides whether you have value. That's it. The market decides whether you have purchase power. One of the things that comes across from business owners a lot too is they don't want to think about succession plan, or they don't want to put it into the overall strategic plan because, one, they don't want customers to know, they don't want employees to know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that is a bit of a myth. I'd like to start to try to myth bust that, because our customers nor our employees are stupid. These are human beings. They know at some point in time the business, if it's worth anything, if it has quality, it's going to transition. How have you dealt with that, I guess, on the acquisition side, where the person is sold to you and perhaps has had that era of secrecy? I'm not going to tell anybody until the ninth hour,
Yeah.
which, agree or disagree, I think that's My opinion is it creates more havoc, I'm sure, than help. What's your take on that?
I would say by far, when the when it's fast and transparent, it goes much better than long and in secret, right? So in my experience anyway. So that means that the more on board and the faster I can get people on board from a team perspective, from clients, understanding what's going on, to be upfront about that, there seems to be a better runway and a better chance at transition than if you slow play it and nobody really knows what's going on. And it's then I think the rumor mill starts, like staff are talking. Nobody knows if are they still going to have a job, because they don't know what you're doing yet, right? But if you come out front and you have a plan, now you're seen as that leader that has a plan, and they're willing to come with you, right? Other than that, they kind of have this swirling soup that they're just not sure what's going on, right? And I think that transparency matters a lot in that, for
See,
sure.
I couldn't agree with you more because confusion creates chaos, and
Mm.
chaos makes a difficult process and undermines strategy by and large, in my opinion. So I agree with you.
I think
My
you
last, go
brought up a
ahead.
good point there, like where, because honestly, I struggle with that too, Lori, where you say your customers or your staff. um, I have fought my own battle with that, right? Of I don't want to make this public, but how do you sell a company? How do you put the word out that there might be an interest there if it's not circumstantial, but just magically appears out of thin air? What does that look like? And in my mind, okay, part of the control is like, how do I control that message properly? Right. And so you brought up a really good point, and it's one of the things that rattles around in my head is that when it comes that time, within that time period, 3 to 5 years or whatever it happens to be, like, what does that look like to roll that out? And I don't know, I'm asking the question, but like that's a sincere question, I think, rattling around in a lot of people's minds.
I think you're right. I'll delve into that a little bit more with you because I can speak to it from the benefit side of things, from the employee side of things, and of course from the CEPA side of things. When it becomes part of that strategic plan of the company, then the stats show that the employees own their own job, right? They are engaged in their own job and they know the value of the company. A valuable company that will sell to a new owner creates that job security in and of itself because it's not going to be foisted upon them as though it's something that's just going to happen. And now we're going to not know whether we're going to have a job tomorrow. Whereas if it forms part of the business strategy, knowing that as an owner, you have to step back, you have to let the business exist on itself, create that value and be sellable, well, then it should not be a big surprise that the employees will expect at one point in time another company to own them. And
Right.
so that's my go on that because I have experienced from the employee's perspective, not being an employee, but being on that end of working with the employees, how detrimental and how many employees will abandon ship when
Yeah.
they
Right.
find out at the ninth hour. And now
Sure.
you're losing that valuable talent
Yeah.
that was part of that sale value.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I had that happen, definitely, where,
Yeah.
the person that I fully expected to lead the company that I had just acquired didn't find out to the last little bit of time, and they took off, and I was left holding the bag, going, "Oh no! Now I've got this thing that I really wanted that key leader that's been there for a long time to step in, and they weren't able to do that because they got spooked, right? And I was didn't feel free to share the plan with them, right?
Yeah.
I totally would have. I left right from the day one. I would have been like, this is my plan for you. I see you as a key leader in this company. I see this growing. But because I felt hampered to have that conversation, I didn't, and I paid the price for it.
Well, and I think as the person who's purchasing, as the acquirer of the business, it would not have been, you were probably hamstringed by the NDAs and the confidentiality, right?
Right.
So you could actually have impacted the acquisition of the company in itself. And I'm just spitballing here, but that to me says that, was it your role to do so? Probably not. Who do you see as the ideal buyer for the group of companies created by Jason Vance?
Yeah, I do give this some thought. And I think each one is its own entity, right? So there's different buyers for the different types of companies. Certainly, I have family, I have kids, and one of the thoughts that's in my head, they're still, I mean, they're young adults and they don't really know what they're doing with their careers yet. But is that on their radar? Do they want to work in this industry or one of these industries? Does that make sense for them? So certainly that's one channel that I have my radar on. What does that look like? And it might manifest into something, and it might totally not. And I'm good. I just want my kids to be happy and fulfilled in their careers. They certainly don't have to follow in my footsteps. So like that's fine. Um, I know that there's so many boomers that are retiring right now, baby boomers, and there's lots of shifting happening in the marketplace, like where people are exiting. And I think that there are also some conglomerates, some equity groups that have formed that are buying up those companies. And so certainly an equity group might swoop in at some point and say, here's a thought, right? And then another component is from industry. So within the same industry as yourself, that's what I've done, is that I've stumbled across people that wanted to exit and they were in the same industry as I was, and we were able to work out a win-win for that relationship. So it could be industry related, market expansion, if you will, right? So I've built up a certain amount of business, and somebody else, smaller or bigger, wants to take on that piece of the pie, and we can work out a deal to make that happen. So I think those are the three areas that I look at. And then there's a fourth, which I have played around with as well in my head, is employee owned, right? Because I've seen some organizations where they have gone through that transition where the original owner retires and gets bought out, but they're bought out actually by the management team and the staff as a whole. They build this share structure so that now it's an employee owned organization. And that is an interesting model to me. And I think that would be another possibility.
I love that concept. And just to dive into that one a little bit more, they call it the ESOP, the employee share option program in
Okay.
the United States and in the UK. And
Mm.
it has fantastic tax advantages for the exiting employer. In Canada, it's called an employee trust, but there's a lot of limitations on it. There's not the same tax advantages, but it is shown, Jason, I agree with you 100%. It is shown that a company that is employee owned has significantly more engagement. They do better in sales. I really like that one. One of my interviews will be the employee share option
Mm.
or trust, because it's a growing and emerging market. I love the concept of that. When you think about value, what does value look like to you in a company?
Depending on the industry, I think value is looked at different, right? Of course, if I have significant amount of equipment or assets worth something on my books, that's obviously a factor into that. There's the standard EBITDA, profit equations. And I've worked with a few evaluators in the past, and what I've been told by multiple of them is that this is an art more than a science. There's certain frameworks that they come up with, but just because I have an evaluator come in and say my company's worth X, that doesn't mean that I'm going to find somebody that's going to pay X, right? Because each buyer is unique as far as what they're looking for from that. So take an equity group, just as an example. If an equity group has maybe 50 or 60 companies within their portfolio, well, they might want a marketing agency to complement that contingent of businesses. So essentially, they buy the business in order to service the other owned entities that they have and continue to make a profit with that. So it serves the greater organization in that model, right? And they would buy it with that in mind. There might be some that buy it for the technology, like actually the one that I bought out of Australia. It was really just software that I was buying, and I just wanted the software, and it fit with another one of my companies. And so that's what I wanted out of it. I don't need staff. I didn't need any of that, and it didn't really have much going on there anyway. But I was able to grab the IP. I really was looking at the intellectual property. That's what I wanted, right? And the customer list, of course. So
Of
so
course.
there's those kind of things that, yeah. So what makes a difference in that is like, accurate customer records, recurring customer transactions, right? How often do they buy from you? How profitable are you? I do feel like your management team plays a big factor in that, when they're looking at it, like how loyal are they to the brand? Are they willing to stay around? Like, I think some of that stuff matters for sure. And I remember like one of the very first business books that I was exposed to was the E-Myth by Michael Gerber, and him just talking about processes, and that operational processes. When you have those set in place and people know their role, and you can bring a new person in to a role, and there's established operating procedures for them to fall into, rather than just doing their own creative license every time you get a new person in, which does create that chaos. That I believe also has value to the investor or to the business, the new business owner, right? The person who's acquiring, because then that things are roughly smooth and standardized from a customer delivery perspective, from how things are run in the finance, for how things are run in operations and sales. That makes a huge difference. So if all of that is standardized, that means I don't have to look at the talent that's there in the business and say like, oh, if they leave, I'm hooped, right? It's like, if they leave, I've got a baseline, a foundation that's been established over time, and I can move people into positions that can work the systems that are already there, right? I think that's huge value.
I think so as well. They talk about that in the lean startup as well. We're going to dovetail right back to the identity side of things. So let's fast forward. Let's say we're 10, 15 years out, and now you're looking at the next Jason Vance. The Jason Vance who is perhaps not a business owner in the same capacity as you are now. What does that next adventure look like to you?
It's funny. My dad just retired. I'll say he's 80, right? And I don't know if I'll ever stop with what I see myself graduating to, if you will, is probably having some business interests, maybe not fully active in the companies, but around, and it from an advisory perspective. The board advisory side of things really intrigues me as well. And I've also thought, what would be great at the end of a fulfilling business career, when you've done business with lots and lots of different people, you have a really quite an expanded network. What can you do with that for the greater good? Like, of course, you want to do that along the way, but I'd love to say, okay, you know what? I'm 60, I'm 65. We're between a few of us that have done business together in the past. We're pooling some resources and we're building a school somewhere. We're doing this, we're doing that. We're pouring back into communities because we've got time, we've got some, energy left, and some resources to make things a better place. And I think, of course, I want to do that along the way, but I think it also frees up time at the end of things. Like when you exit, you've got more time available to do that kind of stuff. And so if that is the passion along the way, that just opens up and accelerates that side a little bit more.
I like your answer, because I can't imagine working as many hours as we do as entrepreneurs on a day-to-day basis, regardless of the business we're in. I think strictly by the name entrepreneur, we know we're working hard. the tenacity, the I just going to get through. I can't imagine a stop. So I like to replace that, retirement with reinvigorate it,
Yeah.
reinvest it, revitalize, re something or other into that next adventure. This has been a great conversation. I just thank you so much for taking the time. This has been really good.
Yeah. Thanks for thinking of me. I really appreciate you reaching out and I really enjoyed it.